What is going on to all you wonderful people out there, to all my DC fans, my Superman fans, my James Gunn fans out there? Welcome to today's discussion. As you can see from the title, we're talking spoilers, full spoilers for James Gunn's Superman, the biggest film of the summer. Thus far, we got another big film coming out and some other things to come out, but I would say it's the summer of Superman, to say the least, and we're breaking it all down. We're talking about the things that worked and didn't work for me. We're talking about the twists, the turns, the cameos, the ending, the greater picture of the DCU, and everything in between. So full spoilers ahead. But before we get into discussion, if you haven't seen the film, go check it out. I'm going to put this out on the weekend, so go check the film out, then come back and join the conversation. Or if you don't care about spoilers, we're going to break it all down. And also, if you want to hear more of my thoughts, like analytically breaking down the technical stuff, the production, the performances, I have a 30-minute video on the channel and in podcast to listen or to watch, so check that out. But before we get into discussion, for my YouTube people out there watching this on YouTube, like, share, comment your thoughts about the film. What worked for you? What didn't work? Your thoughts on the cameos and all the stuff we're going to be talking about in the video. Let me hear it in the comments below. And then if you're listening to this on podcast, that's right, I do have a podcast. Been running for a couple months now. Those links can be found in the description of the YouTube video. But if you are listening to this in podcast form, do me a favor. Like the podcast, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you're listening to this for the first time, consider following me. All the breakdowns, deep dives we do on the YouTube, I typically transport that over to the podcast form. So, DCU has been, well, I shouldn't say begun. It started back with Creature Commandos, but this is the first film out of the gate. Where do we begin? And this will be, and for those that are listening or watching this for the first time, I have notes here that I'm going to have off to the side, kind of talking about the plot points of the film, and then I'm going to share my thoughts about certain scenes and moments and what worked in those scenes and moments. And then I like to veer off to, like, I'm not tangents or rants, but just kind of where my mind's at. Like, these are raw conversations. These are not as structured as some of my, like, Indian Explained videos. Like, these are more open discussions. So I hope you all enjoy that style and hope you have a good time. But let's get into it, man. First off, thoughts before going to the film. I talked about it in my out of theater reaction. I am a lifelong, if you've been a part of the channel, if you've been watching this for a while, I've always shown my loyalty and my passion for DC. I've grown up DC fan. Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Justice League, like, that was my jam growing up. Of course I love Marvel, but DC is where my heart's at, right? I bleed DC colors, and I've talked about it before, you know, whether it be 78 Superman, whether it be 89 Batman, whether it be what we got with Nolan and Snyder and all that different stuff. I've been around on the ride. Now, of course, I wasn't born in the 70s and 80s, but as I grew up in the 90s, I just love these characters. I watched a lot of the animated shows, animated movies, read the different comics. But when it comes to the connective tissue of a DC universe, it's been a rough start. It's been more than rough, right? A lot of highs, but a lot of lows at the same time. So knowing all that, going into this film, I am a big James Gunn fan, whether it was his Marvel stuff with the Guardians, and then he transferred over to DC with the Suicide Squad and Peacemaker, and then obviously this film. I really enjoy his take on comic book characters in movies, especially like when he brings these more obscure characters like a Bloodsport or a Peacemaker or the Guardians, right? Like when he brings these lesser known characters, bring them to the forefront, bring them to a larger audience, it makes us fall in love with a talking tree and a talking raccoon, right? So I like him as the director, but I was a little nervous about his take on Superman, and I'm going to tell you all this right now. Batman's my guy. I am much more of a Batman fan than I am a Superman fan. I've read more Batman comics, watched more Batman content than Superman, but I respect Superman, especially the older I've gotten. So with all that being said, I wasn't going to this being like, he better not change my Superman, because I've never had that infinity love for Superman as a character, as far as like, this is my definitive version, this is how it should always be. Like, I'm not that beholden to the lore and the mythology and the character as a whole. That's why, for example, going on a little tangent early on here, that's why I love Man of Steel, because I don't have that like definite, this is 10 toes down how Superman should be. I was very interested in what Zack Snyder was doing with his Man of Steel and Henry Cavill's portrayal, but we'll have more discussions about Henry and Zach maybe later in this discussion. But nonetheless, I was nervous, excited, all of the above for Superman. And if you all saw my out of theater reaction for the film a couple days ago as I'm recording this,
and more thoughts as I sleep on it, but as I stand right now, as I'm recording this, I'm a bit mixed on this film.
I came out mixed on the film. Tonally, it didn't entirely work for me. The pacing was so frenetic and so fast paced. It kind of felt like we missed out on some character development. And it was just some campiness that didn't totally work for me. But as I said that, I slept on it, took down some notes. Again, I made a 30-minute video expressing more of my thoughts in a more of a thought out process with that video. And I found myself in the middle still, right? I'm still a little bit mixed on it. When I shot that video, I gave the film a 3 out of 5, but it's been a couple of days since I've recorded that video, and I still thought about the film, and here we are now. And I've only seen it once. I do plan on revisiting the film, hopefully this weekend. But as it stands, the more I thought about it, there's things I like a little bit more and I appreciate a little bit more, but I'm still pretty confident at my 3 out of 5. But again, when I revisit it, hopefully sooner rather than later, a score may go up. So with all that said, let's spoil the hell out of this movie, talk about this movie from top to bottom, some of the key points, some of the things that stood out to me. Starting off with the beginning. Now, before I saw the film, maybe about a week and a half, 2 weeks or so, they had showed the first 30 minutes, I believe in Brazil or somewhere internationally, to the fans. And the word had came out that the opening has this Star Wars type of crawl that lets us into what's going on in this universe. I don't remember the text that came up on the screen. I think it was 300 years ago, metahumans coexist with humans. 30 or 3 decades ago, the world was not the world, but Superman crash landed on Earth, and Pa and Ma Kent raised him. And then I think it said 3 years ago, the world was introduced to Superman as this metahuman, the most powerful metahuman on Earth. And then I can't remember if it was 3 weeks or 3 months. There was a conflict. There was a war that Superman intervened on, and it caused some controversy amongst the people. And then it was 3 hours, I want to say, that we find out that Superman loses his first battle versus the Hammer, and then we see him crash land in the snow just 100 feet away from the Fortress of Solitude. And of course, we've seen this, they've showed this scene in the trailers. They released a full clip of this scene, and right off the bat, we see Superman bruised, battered, bleeding, almost dead at this point, and it's a striking image. Now again, haven't seen that scene, haven't seen it in trailers, but now having full context of what brought Superman to this point, that told me everything I needed to know, in a sense, obviously, not everything, but it let me know where we're starting off with the Superman. We're seeing him for the first time beaten. And I think, and this is kind of a conversation I want to have throughout this breakdown, one of the things I think James Gunn wanted to put a huge emphasis on was showing the vulnerability of Superman and showing the humanity of Superman and showing us that he isn't perfect, right? And I think even James Gunn said this a couple weeks ago, that he never wanted his version of Superman to be completely perfect, right? He's going to get beaten. He's going to lose. And we see that quite frequently in this film. And I think that is an interesting way to allow us into this version of Superman. Now, to elaborate on that further, what I like about this version, as I thought about it further as the last few days went on, a lot of Superman movies, a lot of comic book movies in recent memory, they want things to be so rooted and grounded in reality. They want us to feel like this is right outside of our doors, which works with certain characters and works with certain tones. But what I like about what James Gunn is doing with the DCU and did with this movie in particular is, instead of for Superman coming into our world and being set in our reality, we're put in his world, right? We're put in his perspective. We're jumping right into the DCU. This is going back to the Star Wars of it all. This is very much like a Star Wars approach. Like, I wasn't born when the first Star Wars came out, but I remember watching it for the first time, and that experience of just being thrown right into the world, right? We're on a ship with Darth Vader and meeting Princess Leia and Luke on Tatooine, like, what's going on, But as the film develops, you find out the worlds, the planets, the politics, the characters, and it doesn't work for all stories, but it's a cool way to introduce you into the world and just throwing you into the deep end of the pool. So I like that approach, especially from my perspective. Like, I know these characters. I know about certain characters more than others, but I know this world. I know Metropolis. I know Superman. So I was familiar with it. So I was okay with that, which is, I guess, is a question I want to ask you all, for those that are maybe not as fond of DC characters or the DC universe or Superman particularly. How did you feel about being thrown right into the world? metahumans exist. Superman already has everyone knows who he is. This is his third year as Superman. The Lois and Clark of it all, them dating, her knowing who Superman is. How did you all feel about that approach? Did it work? Was it too jarring? Was it too forward to you all? Let me know how you felt about the introduction into this world. I liked it, but let me know what you all thought about it. But from that point on, we see Krypto jumping on him after damn near losing his life. But I like that relationship that we see early on. But Krypto brings him into the Fortress of Solitude, sees Superman being picked up by his robots, and we hear him saying to his robots, can you play my parents, my Kryptonian parents' message for me, because it's something that soothes him and relaxes him. Just something we will definitely talk about later on, which is the different interpretation. Nothing that's not common. We'll get into the conversation about his Kryptonian parents a little bit later, but we that's something to keep in mind, is how he viewed his parents and how the message they gave him at a young age really kind of shaped him and motivates him to do what he does, to be the protector of Earth. So again, we saw the scene in trailers. They showed the clip. He gets recharged by the sun and he goes back out to fight. Even before then, again, going back to the characterization of Superman and the tongue-in-cheek kind of campiness, I don't say the goofiness of the character, which I think is something that is what a lot of people were looking for with this version. Is the obviously kind of, we spent the last 10 years with Henry Cavill, who again, I really enjoyed his version of Superman, but understanding this isn't that version, right? We see Clark or Superman saying, gee golly, or something early on before he heads back out to the fight and saying, I got to go out back to the fray. It's just like, this is a much different version of the character. And on that note, as we'll kind of talk about throughout this breakdown, the duality between Clark and Superman and the performance by David Corenswet is something I've really been thinking about the last few days, and how he is, for a lot of people out there, this will be their Superman. If obviously he's stuck to land. Like, to me, I'm still Henry, I'm still Christopher Reeves, like those are my guys, but I'm really, really excited to see what David can do with this character moving forward. I really enjoyed his performance for the most part. As like I said, the days that went by, I've come to really appreciate the nuance and the little distinction between, again, Clark and Superman, and how he plays the character was pretty interesting. But gets back into the fight. We get the fight where this is kind of round 2 with him and the Hammer, and that's a big mystery. Who's the Hammer of Bolivia, I believe was the name of the country. But we have them fighting, and we see Lex has this way where he can tap into his goon. At that point in the film, we didn't know, but he has all these cameras that are watching and analyzing a fight, very kind of like Iron Man when he was fighting Captain America in Civil War, where he was analyzing all his moves. And we find out that Lex has been recording his battles. He has like over 25 battles that has been recorded, so he kind of knows all of his moves, which to that point, for my comic book fans, Superman is a brawler. He can hold his own in the fight, but he's not like Batman or some of the more skilled hand-to-hand combat fighters in the DCU. He's, more punch, is more so than like actually having those hands. So, it's understandable that it's probably, I don't want to say easy, but it's, for someone like Lex, it's easy to get the pattern of his style of fighting. So see him telling his employees to do this, do that, felt very much like a video game or like a VR where they're controlling, at the point, the Hammer, but we find out later it's Ultraman. But I like that. But I will speak to, and this brings me into a conversation with the action of it all. I enjoyed the action. I thought this film has some solid flight sequences, some solid hand-to-hand combat sequences, especially between Ultraman and Superman in the third act. I wouldn't say I was blown away by the action sequences. And again, this is not to compare too much, but like when I saw Man of Steel for the first time in 2013, like, and seeing, one of the things I think Zack Snyder's like incredible at, one of his strong suits is shooting action. And I just remember seeing the action with whether it was the Superman fighting the other Kryptonians in Smallville or Superman versus Zod. Like, that to me is game-changing action sequences with a character like that. And again, 10 plus years later, we've seen and even things like The Boys, we see so many great action sequences on television, Invincible, and obviously other action movies that have people that can fight in the air and move at super quick speeds. But I don't want to compare this film's fighting sequences or their action to Zack Snyder and 2 previous iterations. But again, I'm getting that I wasn't blown away by the action, but I thought it was solid for what we got. But we see the fight. Superman, when he goes back into the fight, he's like 83% healed from the sun. He's not completely 100%. He gets defeated with round 2. The Hammer throws him in the ground, and yet again, another comic book reference and something I felt throughout this duration of the film, and the homages and the similarities to other comic book films. When Superman crash lands on the ground and we see the civilians surrounding him and helping him up, and I can't remember the character's name who ends up dying a little bit later. I think his name was Ali, but like he helps Superman up, and we see Superman's trying to fight and get back in the fight, but he's, you know, broken and beaten. I like how they gathered around Superman, right? This is 3 years into him being announced as Superman. The people have become used to him as Superman, and they rally around him. And that reminded me one or two things. It reminded me of the film, tonally reminded me of the first Spider-Man, Sam Raimi, in regards to it embracing the more comic book elements of Superman and being a little goofy, a little silly, a little hokey at times. Also, that sequence in particularly, him being surrounded and helped by the civilians, reminded me of Spider-Man 2, where Peter was going against Doc Ock and they were on the train, and, you know, he ended up stopping the train, his mask came off, and the people in New York, like, took care of him. Like, oh, he's just a kid. And they put the mask back on him and they looked after him. Like, that relationship reminded me of that scene. And I will say, to that relationship, Metropolis, the civilians, I wanted more of that from the film. I really do wish that Metropolis, I wish that it had more of personality. Like, that's the thing I love about DC. Metropolis, Gotham City, Bloodhaven, Central City, Star City, I mean, you name it, the Mascara, like, these locations are, again, otherworldly. They're not set in our world, like everything and not making a Marvel conversation, but everything in Marvel is like, we're in New York, we're in Chicago, you know, we just got in Chicago with Ironheart. It's like, again, they're coming to our world. I love that we can go otherworldly with DC, and of course you could do that with, obviously not everything in the Marvel Cinematic Universe or Marvel Comics is placed in reality, but I love how distinct Metropolis, Gotham City is, and they have personalities, and I didn't feel like Metropolis had much of a personality. Hopefully we get to spend more time in Metropolis and get to see other sections of Metropolis, and it has a little bit more personality as the DCU continues to evolve and continues to move on. But I wish there was more of a distinct flair to Metropolis. But putting that aside, as we get the first act, we transition into the understanding of what's going on at play, what's Lex Luthor doing, and where does his involvement of Superman. So this is where we get introduced to our big bad, Lex Luthor, who I consider to be not only one of the best in the DC universe, but one of the best villains of all time, whether that's DC, Marvel, you name it, any geekdom fandom out there, like Lex Luthor is that dude. And I love iterations of the character via comics, via animated movies, shows, and some great iterations of the character, minus Jesse Eisenberg. But here nor there, the whole thing is he's trying to convince the government, which we see the scene, him going to the Pentagon, which I will say Ultraman reminded me so much of like Black Noir from The Boys. Like, he turned the light switch on, holding donuts for Lex, like he was his lackey essentially. But nonetheless, the scene that we see Lex in with the government, we have a governmental different officials, and we have Rick Flag Sr., who we've seen. If you guys didn't see it, great show, recommended. Creature Commandos this past December, covered it on my channel, really enjoyed that series. And we see that he's now running Argus, which I will say, for continuity purposes and coming from one project to the next, if you all, I won't spoil it, but if you guys have seen Creature Commandos, where we last see Rick Flag Sr. and how we see him in this film, I'm very curious on if we're going to fill in the blanks on how he goes from Creature Commandos, where he ends, to being the head of Argus. I'm assuming that's going to be answered in Peacemaker, which comes out, I believe, at the end of August, which I'm really looking forward to that series because I really enjoyed the season 1. But I was like, this is interesting. The position that he's in, where's Amanda Waller? But again, I'm assuming it's a safe assumption to assume that we're going to learn more about his involvement with Argus and how he ended up from, again, the end of Creature Commandos to running the company or running the Argus organization. So again, the purpose of that scene was to show that they tell Lex, you know, Superman has been protecting Earth. He's been the Earth protector. We don't have any reason to think he's going to do anything other than protect us. Lex and the brother are like, well, if you do feel like he's a threat to humanity, you got to give us proof. So that's Lex's main objective in this film. And earlier on in the movie, when we go to the Fortress of Solitude, the engineer follows Superman and where he crash lands, as you see his Fortress of Solitude goes in the ground, and she's like, do you want me to go? I can't go in there. This disappears. Like, oh, we got enough intel. We're going to figure it out later. So they planted that seed early on. But again, the idea from now on is Lex has to find a way to prove that Superman cannot be trusted. And while we're on that topic of Superman can't be trusted, I know there's been some unnecessary controversy revolving around Superman and politics, which is like, if you've ever watched a Superman movie, if you ever read a Superman comic, he's literally all about politics, right? But nonetheless, this film doesn't lean too heavily into politics, but the idea of like a metahuman, like a Superman, intervening with political conflict and war and things of that nature was an interesting angle that I'm really intrigued to see what this DCU has to say about that, right? We saw a little bit of that with Creature Commandos. There's a metahuman that took over or wanted to take over a certain country. So I'm really intrigued to see how James and other creators tackle that subject, where it goes moving forward. And I think it's interesting because I think there's also another angle that this film kind of hints at, and that's like the governmental control over the metahumans, right? And this idea of the Watchmen, who watches the Watchmen type of a narrative. And I'm really intrigued to see if there will be a certain, we got that with the Justice Gang, right? They're a company-owned superhero team, a la, like the Boys, and we've seen that in a couple other iterations of Sokovia Accords with the Avengers. So I'm really intrigued to see how this universe handles the idea of governmental control, having different superheroes being owned by billionaires like a Maxwell Lord, like a Lex Luthor, like, other billionaires in this universe. So that's something I'm really intrigued to see as far as the greater DCU goes. But going back to Lex's plan, he has to find the evidence. But later in that evening, we get one of my favorite scenes. It's not an action scene. It's not an upbeat scene. It's a scene that conveyed to me and gave me a breath of fresh air and a relief, and that is the chemistry between Lois Lane and Clark Kent. Now, in this scene, we see right off the bat, they're very physical. They have off-the-charts chemistry. I'm referring to David and Rachel Brosnahan. I've been following the press tour. Like, their chemistry off-screen really translates to what we see on screen, and it just goes to show. And again, I gotta give this man his flowers. James Gunn, is he perfect at casting? Like, I'm thinking of his filmography, especially, his stuff with the Guardians and obviously his stuff with DC so far. I don't think he's missed. Like, everyone that he cast really fits the character perfectly, man. And the Lois and Clark relationship is so pivotal because without Lois, Superman doesn't function properly. And without Superman functioning properly, the DC doesn't function properly. So she's such an integral character. Their chemistry is amazing. We see them in the kitchen making out. We see that they're slightly, and I believe the film explains that they've been together. I don't think it's been 3 years. I think it's been less than a year, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but obviously they've been together. She knows who he really is, or knows that he's Superman, and we have the whole interviewing scene happen. It's like a 10-12 minute scene, and it plays so well because it speaks so much, again, to James Gunn's interpretation of the character. We see Superman lose a lot in this film, and this is a scene that he loses to Lois Lane. Obviously, it's not a physically imposing type of a scene of them going back and forth physically, but mentally, she challenges Superman. Like, she wins this battle in regards to, okay, Superman, let's talk about your decisions, how your decisions, whether it is saving people. And I love the scenes. It shows you these are the essence of these characters, the fundamental core of these characters, of how Clark and Superman, no matter what, his number one goal is to save people and to save animals and to save lives, regardless of the consequences. And the reverse of that with Lois Lane, yes, she's just as good as Clark Kent, but she knows that the world they live in, when you do certain things, we see that with him intervening with the war with the two countries. So I love this scene, how they're going back and forth. And again, she beats him in this words of battles, right? And she navigates the conversations like, yeah, I know you, I know how you're going to answer these questions, but these are the tough hitting questions that you're going to be getting thrown at you from journalists and governmental officials and so on and so forth. Again, that there are consequences to your actions. And I really enjoyed that scene. And it causes a bit of a rift in the relationship because we really don't see them on the same page. Like, that's the last time they really get to, well, there's another scene when he turns himself in, but like, this is kind of the last time we see them kind of in that lovey-dovey stages, right? They're kind of, and she even says like, I don't know if this is going to work. I knew this wasn't going to work because she's not good in relationships. So I like them planting the seeds and them again, kind of on the back end of the honeymoon phases, and they're starting in that part of the relationship where it's like, please hang your coat up, and they know each other's buttons, they're still learning each other. So I really enjoyed that scene, and again, number one thing was we get to see the chemistry, and we get to see that Lois is who she really is from everything I've seen from her growing up, and that she can hold her on in the conversation, and she doesn't hold back when it comes to getting the truth. So going back into the main narrative, knowing what we know now about Lex, he's trying to find dirt on Superman, so he sends out the kaiju monster. He's distracting Superman. We meet the Justice Gang, but we have Eve Taskmaster, we have Lex Luthor, we have Ultraman, and the Engineer now making their way into the Fortress of Solitude, and they find something very damning, and that is the message that soothes Clark Kent, that soothes Kal-El, and that's the message from his parents. And we see the Engineer is using her nanotechnology to hack into his systems. You know, obviously they take out all the robots. And we'll talk about the message here in a second, but I do want to talk about when she is doing her hacking. It seemed like she wasn't in control in that scenario. Like, you would think that she's done this, and she said, and we get a little bit of backstory, like he created her and she wanted to become who she became to stop Superman. We don't know why. I don't know if it's the propaganda of what Lex spewed in her ear, that Superman can't be trusted, so let's transform you into this metahuman to defend yourself if he ever does go wild and to work with me or whatnot. So we get a little bit of that, and also I know she's from the Authority, and that's a project that's kind of in limbo. I don't know if they're going to make it into a series or a movie, but a little bit I do know about the Authority. It's essentially like their version of the Boys, where they save people no matter the cost, which means they kill people. And we already kind of get that from this film, like she's willing to do what it takes to stop Superman. So we see her hacking the system, gets the message, and we'll talk about what the message has on to say. The thing that she was able to find out, which is something that Superman wasn't able to do, was the message has been damaged since he was a kid, the second portion of the message. So he never knew what the final words from his parents were. But she gets into the system, and like I said, she doesn't seem to have full control, which is a theory I'm going to lead into here in a little bit as far as the authenticity of that message. But Superman and the Justice Gang, which consists of Guy Gardner, a Green Lantern, we have Hawk Girl, and we have Mr. Terrific. We see the difference of how Superman saves people and can defeat evil versus what they do, and it's a huge gap, right? Because they're trying to kill this monster, this kaiju, poke him in the eye, and we ultimately see with the T-spheres that Mr. Terrific is able to blow him up from the inside. But Superman's like, no, let's try to study it and maybe learn from it and maybe become allies. But they're like, no, kid, that's not how the world works, which yet again shows us the world and the differences of Superman. It's kind of almost the reverse of Kingdom Come, what they're doing in this story, as far as like the heroes learning from Superman versus the other way around from that story, which is much later down the line. I think James Gunn says he wants to do Kingdom Come eventually. That's like the end game potentially of the storytelling. But we see the Justice Gang takes him out, and there's not a lot of tension, but obviously they go about heroing much differently. I will say, since we're on the topic, the Justice Gang was okay. Mr. Terrific, which I talked about in my other video and my other breakdown, was the standout as far as supporting cast. He really stood out to me, and I'm really excited to see more of that character, which is something I'll talk about later. But Guy Gardner of it all, I like Nathan Fillion. I'm not the biggest Guy Gardner fan for multiple reasons, and that's kind of the appeal of the character. Like, he's not the most likable character, and Nathan plays it perfectly. But in this film, he didn't really do that. I mean, he was a comic relief and has his tendencies about him, but I wasn't like one way or the other about the character. Like, I'm interested to see him in his next project, which Nathan has spoken about, like, When You See Me Again, which will be in the Green Lantern show, up against Hal Jordan and Jon Stewart. We're going to see him acting a little bit differently, right? It's a different tone that we're going to see him in, so I'm really interested in that. But the other side, like I said, Mr. Terrific was fantastic, and we'll talk about him later more in depth. But Hawk Girl, let's just get this out of the way, because there's not much that she gets to do in this film. Isabela Merced, great actress. She's on one hell of a run in her career right now, and deservedly so. She's one of the more diverse actors in her age range. Like, I'm really excited for her future. But in this film, I thought she was more of just like a placeholder. It really didn't have much to do. And again, understand that this is an introductory of the DCU and its characters, but out of all the characters her, Metamorpho, and a couple others, especially from the Daily Planet, just felt a little one note, one dimensional. But again, knowing that we will probably get more of her, especially knowing that she's going to be in Peacemaker, I don't assume we're going to get a Hawk Girl episode, but I'm assuming we're going to get a little bit more from her and probably see more of her in the future, hopefully, because I know she's a really great character. So Justice Gang, we'll talk about them, some other scenes with them later, but they were just okay. They didn't really, besides Mr. Terrific, they didn't really do that much for me. But at this point, they defeat the kaiju monster, and the message gets out that there is something that Lex has found, as he said he was going to find for the government. He puts it all out there for the media to see. He's on this newscast and talks about it, and they play the video, and it's essentially the first half of the video that Superman has, goes to sleep to, which is his parents telling him to be the beacon of hope, save humanity, yada, yada, yada. But then he hears the other part of the video, which he's never heard in his entire life, which I will say, I find that quite silly that he hasn't for 30 years he's been on Earth, and with his robots and other metahumans, that he was never able to find someone to decode the part of the message. That made no sense to me, but nonetheless, he hears it. And it's the second half of that portion of the video. Jor-El and Laura basically say, we want you to take over the Earth. Like, we want you to, groom Earth, get them all prepared for Kryptonian takeover. That is your mission, which is, let's talk about it. That is something I did not like. Now, as the days went by, I have thought about it further. And the reason I didn't like it, because I was like, this is, take control, take, creative liberties on how you want to interpret the characters. But that's such a fundamental thing for Clark and Superman and Kal-El to have that relationship with Jor-El and Laura and his Kryptonian parents, and the message of like, you're the beacon of hope, you can save humans, you can be the best of humanity and show them their better halves. And that was like so jarring to me. But then the more I thought about it, I was like, even though I haven't personally read any of the graphic novels or the comics that highlight a more nefarious and maybe a more evil version of Jor-El, I also know, I didn't watch all of Smallville, but I know there was a certain plot point at certain points where Jor-El was somewhat evil. He would do like evil things, and we saw the difference between Jonathan Kent and Jor-El and all that relationship. So there is things to show Jor-El having a more evil side, and he's also a scientist, right? We know even in Man of Steel, we saw that version of Jor-El can find a way to bring our Kryptonian atmosphere to planet Earth to make sure our legacy lives on. So there's history to show that, but I'm just like, is this how do you really want to come out of the gate with that narrative that his parents were evil? And I get the other side of the narrative of like who you're raised by. And we obviously know Jonathan and Ma Kent are such good people, and they raised him to be a good human being, that he, no matter what the message was, he's not going to ever become that version that his Kryptonian parents wanted him to be. So I get the narrative of that, and we see that at the end of the movie. Like, he chooses to listen and see all the video coverage of his parents raising him, who actually raised him. But this gets me to a theory. Now, throughout the film, it's questioned if, again, did the engineer alter that footage, that audio file, did Lex Luthor alter it? And even Mr. Rivers say, no, that's authentic. Like, all the world's best decoders or whatever, this is what the message had. Going back to what I said about the engineer and her hacking to the system and her seeming to not have control, I would not be surprised if it is revealed that message was altered, and it was altered by a very popular Superman Rogues Gallery villain by the name of Brainiac. I do think there is, and this just kind of leads into my thoughts of like when we can see Superman again, who we can go up against, and going back how this film kind of coincidentally ties into a lot of the political landscape of what we're going through in the real world, and how another thing that we're going on in the world is like AI, artificial intelligence, deep fake, what's real, what's not real, and things of that nature. And Brainiac alters a lot of stuff. That's one of his skills. That he's like super intelligent. He's a supercomputer with his intellect. So that is something I'm thinking, and I hope that it's the case. Like, I really do hope that they don't, I don't want to say retcon what they established here, but I do hope that there is more to that narrative of sending him on Earth, not to destroy Earth, but to, again, show the beauty of humanity. So I hope that is something that's explored later, that Brainiac was the one that altered that message for Kal-El. So at this point in the film, this is where Superman is being looked at as like public enemy number one. And I will say, at first I'm like, man, that's really quick of a dime for these people to turn on him after, him being Earth's hero, and now he's Earth's worst enemy in like a drop of a dime. But it does kind of speak to, again, more social commentary of like today's times. And I'll talk about this a little bit later as far as the James Gunn of it all. There is something to say about how in today's society we have our heroes or people we look up to, our mentors, whether it's celebrities or artists or parents or whoever you look up to in today's society. And all it takes is, one bad tweet, one old message, one video, something that's damning to their persona, that they're on top of the world, and then all it takes is that one moment that can ruin their whole legacy. And that's kind of, commentary on something that we deal with in today's society. One altered message or not altered message, or something that really didn't have anything to do with the person we're looking at now, Superman, but his Kryptonian heritage, affecting how people view him today. So it is an interesting way to look at how Earth, or at least in this case, Metropolis, how they turn on him so quickly. But it does speak to, like I said, things that we see every day nowadays, right? Our heroes are actually villains. Superman is now down and out. I love the backdrop. The scene, it's cool to see what's going on in the background. The Justice Gang is fighting this interdimensional alien. We have the conversation. This is, again, I talked about the Clark Kent and the Lois Lane of it all before he goes off and gets captured. This is a really nice scene, right? She's telling him what he should do, how he should handle this. He wants to turn himself in. And I will say, going back to a conversation earlier with Clark Kent of it all, we got a lot of Superman, which I appreciate, but we didn't get that much Clark Kent, which I do hope we hopefully can see David in the role as Clark more than Superman. But this reminded me so much of Matt Reeves' The Batman, where in that film we saw a lot of Batman, which I love. It's my favorite comic book character. But we didn't get that much of Bruce Wayne. And whenever we did get Bruce Wayne, we know that, and this isn't breaking new ground, but I've always looked at Batman as like Bruce Wayne, Batman. He is fully himself when he's in the suit. But when he's out of the suit and he's putting on a suit as Bruce Wayne, that's when he's like at his most uncomfortable, because that's not who he is, the playboy persona. Where I don't think Clark Kent has that battle within himself. Like, there's of course an internal battle between Kal-El, Superman, and Clark, but his identity isn't like, I don't think he finds himself in a suit. Like, I think he knows who he is when he's Clark, and he knows who he is when he's Superman, and things of that nature. But again, there is still conflict within himself, but I don't think he relies on like, I have to be Superman 24/7 like Batman did, especially they were both in their year 2 or 3 with the Batman in this film. But again, I do wish that there were more scenes with Lois and Clark, Lois and Superman. But again, I'm assuming that this is just a taste, and this talks to a little bit of my criticism with this film, and that is the pacing, right? This is if you take away the credits, this is like a 2-hour film. And within 2 hours, there's so much being thrown at us from not only Clark and Lois, but Lex Luthor and Krypto and the villains and the world building and the Justice League or the Justice Gang. So there's a lot going on. And I think within that, we unfortunately get shortchanged with things like having more scenes with certain characters, having more scenes with his human parents, and so on and so forth. So, Big Blue decides to turn himself in, and this is where we have one of the more darker scenes, probably the darkest scene in the film, which again, tonally speaking, and I haven't really talked about some of the tone stuff. I talked about it every now and then, but like tonally at this point in the film, like it's... The film to me never really truly felt like there were stakes. There were like high tense stakes, like someone could die at any point. Like you never, and not that you have to go to those dire times that someone can die at any point, but I never felt that the film had that weight, that gravitas of like shit's really going down, right? Which I think plays into like the more lightheartedness of the tone that the film's going for. But with that being said, the darkest moment, we see Superman being taken in by Rick Flag Sr., who, like, I'm sorry, Supes, I wish it didn't have to come to this, which is, interesting for him to say. It shows a little bit of his duality. And again, if you saw Creature Commando show, you know that he's a good guy. He says that, and they bring him into the Pocket Universe, which there's a little side tangent. 4 or 5 months, maybe even 6 months ago, might have even been longer than that, there was a leak online of the full story of Superman. And I normally I come across leaks every now and then, and I don't like make videos about them because that's just not something I'm really intrigued by. But sometimes when I come across a leak, I'm like, let me see what this is talking about. And I read most of it, and I didn't read it all because I'm like, if some of this is true, I don't want this to be revealed now. I want to experience it. And I'm going to put it on the screen now. As you all can see, I don't know who the username was. I think this came from Reddit. But as you can see, 99% of what they talked about in this leak came to be true. There's a couple things they didn't elaborate on, but for the most part, that's the gist of the story. And one of the things of that leak was that we find out in this pocket universe, which we see Lex has made with like the ripples of reality and black holes, he's able to create these pocket universes, which I kind of roll my eyes at because it kind of alludes to like this is a gateway to multiversal things, which I'm kind of tired of at this point. But neither here nor there. He has a pocket universe, which was leaked, was revealed in the leaks. And, you know, the pocket universe idea was introduced in season 1 of Peacemaker with like the folding pocket universe that Peacemaker's dad had created. So the idea has been in the DCU since Peacemaker, or that was the DCEU, but if you saw Peacemaker season 2 trailer, they're going to continue. I think that's the gateway into how they're going to bring Peacemaker into the DCU. But again, multiverse shenanigans. But the pocket universe idea was a little goofy to me, a little hokey, a little ridiculous. I don't want to say stupid, but it just was kind of goofy. Obviously, comic booky stuff. But the thing that was really kind of silly to me, and this is where James Gunn of it all kind of plays into my thoughts here, we find out that Lex Luthor has like these monkeys that are constantly online spewing out hate about Superman on Twitter or whatever that universe's version of Twitter or TikTok or Instagram is. That these monkeys 24/7, what was it, Super Shit was the name they gave him or something like that. And I didn't find it that funny, but I did find it interesting the way my brain thinks is like James Gunn, writer, director, producer, co-CEO of DC. He has a persona online. If you all are on X or on Threads, he, for better or for worse, he communicates with his fans. He communicates with his trolls. And I think this whole monkey online smear campaign was very personal for James Gunn. Like his influences of experiencing online trolls into this film, because the way I think about it, again, Superman, James Gunn, was at 2018 where his old tweets had came out and he got fired by Disney. And, you know, the Guardians of the Galaxy, the cast was the one who saves him. Switch that over to this film. The Justice Gang, essentially being the Guardians of the Galaxy, saves Superman. But the idea that Superman was canceled and how Lex Luthor and these trolls try to cancel Superman and how, obviously, again, tying that to James Gunn, it was a little too meta for me. Again, I could be totally off, but I think there's some you know, evidence of some proof there that James allowed that to be maybe some meta commentary on how he feels about internet trolls not taking him down, but wasn't the biggest fan of the pocket universe and the trolling and all that stuff. But again, the most darkest moment was, again, I think the character's name was Ali. We see that Lex has Superman put into a cage with Metamorpho, who is able to, his superpowers are he can make elements out of anything. And we see Lex instructs him to make kryptonite, which I think they say, it's a quick line that there's no kryptonite left on Earth, but, you know, he can obviously make that with Metamorpho, and he does that. And other governmental officials, this is where they put, like, people that talk shit about them, or I think Lex says that his ex-girlfriends were in there, or journalists that's made bad articles about him are in there. I'm sure there were probably maybe other meta-humans that we just didn't see, or maybe eagle-eye fans. You might see someone in one of those cages that, you know, I didn't see on first view, but that was silly. Again, his girlfriends and journalists, like, this is kind of goofy. And I also thought it was kind of goofy that he was like, you know, I can't kill you yet because the government wants you to answer why you interfered and like question your motives. Like, you're Lex Luthor. This is the moment you've been waiting for 3 years to kill Superman, and you want to keep him hostage and keep him overnight. Like, no, kill him right then and there. Like, why are you playing with your food? Anyway, you know, that's a little nitpick, but again, the whole pocket universe of it all was just so goofy to me. But moving outside of that, Lex Luthor has the advantage of Superman. Again, we've seen throughout this film, we have yet to see Superman get a win, right? He's losing to his girlfriend. He's losing to, you know, well, I guess you could technically say he won when he beat the Kaiju, but that was really the Justice Gang. He really didn't win because they killed him. But meanwhile, this is where, again, it shows the agency shows the capabilities of Lois Lane. She's not a damsel in distress. She goes to the Justice Gang. She finds them at the Justice Hall, the Hall of Justice, which is under construction. And if I'm not mistaken, little Easter egg here, I could have sworn that there was a mural on the walls that were like illustrating the history of metahumans, Justice League of Society. And I think they were kind of alluding to, again, and they've been around for 300 plus years, of there have been different groups, different, iterations of these groups as the years have gone by, and kind of showing the history of the mural there. So I thought that was a cool little Easter egg. But Lois convinces Mr. Terrific to join her to save Clark and save Superman. There's the whole funny moment with her and Guy Gardner, her making fun of his bowl cut, him talking about how he knows who Clark is, and they talk about the Hypto glasses, which is a comic book thing. It was funny, very comic booky, to embrace that element of the character. But she convinces Mrs. Terrific to save them, and one of the other cooler, probably my favorite action sequence is them. I don't know where they were. They were outside of Metropolis, or maybe they were even further than that, but they find Superman because Mr. Terrific tracks all of his friends by putting like a tracker in their bloodstream, and got the funny moment of Hawk Girl and Guy Gardner being like, "Did you do that to us?" But anyway, we see them. They go to the beach. They find before they find Superman, we get the cool T-spheres and Mr. Terrific using his abilities, and a cool needle drop moment with the music playing, and very similar to like a Guardian scene. I think of Guardians 3 when they're fighting down the hallway and how the camera moves and seeing. Listen, man, Mr. Terrific was terrific in this movie, and I'm going to make another like short video about this, but I am to assume that the way that Mr. Terrific was positioned in this movie is very similar to how I feel about how Peacemaker was positioned in the Suicide Squad, and how he ultimately got his TV show, and we're going to get season 2 of his TV show. Either movie or TV show, I'm probably leaning towards a TV show. I think we're going to get more Mr. Terrific. He's going to have his own show or movie, probably a show, and it's going to be the Terrifics, right? Which consists of him, Metamorpho, Plasma Girl, and Plastic Man. So I think that that's something that we can see an announcement. And I think James has said that he has a secret project that was just greenlit, and I think it involves Mr. Terrific and the Terrifics being, like I said, pretty safe. It's going to be a TV show, but I could be wrong. But either way, we see Mr. Terrific, Lois Lane making their way into the Pocket Universe. They're trying to find Clark. At this point, after Lex Luthor, which again, going back to that menacing scene with him killing Ali, which I didn't think I thought it was like a joke or like a hologram, but no, he actually shot him point blank in the head, and he threatens Superman that he's going to kill Clark Kent if he doesn't give him answers or something. But we see that scene take place. We see them get into the Pocket Universe. Metamorpho is his son Joey, which that was, again, Metamorpho, Hawkgirl, kind of, I don't say pointless, but like more plot devices. Like obviously he was a plot device with the kryptonite, but I was just like the whole, who is this Joey? Like I'm not the biggest, I don't know that much about Metamorpho. Like I don't know, does he have a son that he goes on adventures with? They have a conversation where he's like, well, if I let you go, will you save my son? And he felt bad that he couldn't save the guy that Lex Luthor killed, and he doesn't really feel like he's a villain. He's conflicted. And again, the whole idea of like Superman makes people better, and he like leads people to do the right thing. So Metamorpho eventually removes the kryptonite. He creates a kind of a sun environment for Superman can regain his strength and save his son, and we see all that play out. And if I'm being honest, again, the whole Pocket Universe thing is just so hokey to me, because it's like, this is probably $1 billion infrastructure of like having transportive wormholes to transfer you to one thing to the next, to have these, building structures in a Pocket Universe. You would have thought that there would have been more security involved, and I think the Lex Luthor people in the suits were called the Raptors. Like, you would have thought they would have been filled with Raptors, but it was just a couple guards, and Superman was able to break out. He breaks out Krypto, and again, this whole scene, it was just visually, it was kind of messy. It did not look visually pleasing to me, because it looked like when we see Superman trying to get out of the place, Metamorpho couldn't touch his son when he's transforming or whatever. So Superman has Joey, the alien baby. He has Krypto. They fall into like this, I don't even know what you call it, black hole pocket universe water lake. It looked like, a lot of people say it looked like Minecraft, which I haven't seen that film and I never played Minecraft, but I get the reference with the blocks and all that. But it looked like Pixel. If you are a terrible movie, Adam Sandler, terrible movie, like Pixel with a little bit of like Pac-Man. It just looked visually gross to me. He's going in the water, fighting some of the raptors. They're approaching the wormhole, the black hole. And if they go in there, they're going to get, trapped in there forever. And Superman uses his breath, his ice breath, to avoid that. And we see, Krypto gets into the mix and they save them. But I just thought that, again, tonally, it was so goofy and hokey. Visually, it looked terrible. And it's just like, ugh, can we get away from that scene immediately? But anyway, we do eventually. They save Superman and they get him out of the portal, get him out of the pocket universe, and they get him to Smallville. Narratively, thematically, I get the point of his parents, Ma and Pa Kent. I don't know if it was just me, but I just never emotionally felt attached to that relationship, not from a performance standpoint. I thought they were doing the best they could, and they were very much leaning into like, these are, I live in Missouri, and I've lived in other places of the States, but this is very much like a Midwest type of a family, right? And I don't want to be insulting, but they were just so simple. And I can appreciate the simplicity. Like, there's normal people that you got some sugar, you can go over to their house, get some sugar, you want to have a good conversation, you want to be around good people. That's the Kent family. But I don't know if it was just, they were just too simpleton, that I just never felt that sense of like, oh, I love this family. And again, hopefully we get more time with them. But I'm just talking for myself and putting the jokes aside for a second. I just never felt that emotional gravitas with those scenes. There's only really that one scene where we see Clark in his bedroom and she his poster, which was a joke earlier in the film about the music he listened to and him thinking he's punk rock. We see Lois meets his parents for the first time. Krypto's with them and, all that stuff. And we have the conversation between him and his dad, which I will say, a very interesting thing that I don't think we've ever seen, at least in live action. Paul Kent's alive. Paul Kent makes it out of this movie, which we don't see that in the original. We don't see that in Zack Snyder's film. Like 9 times out of 10, or 10 out of 10, we've always seen Paul Kent dies at some point in the first film. We don't get this here. So this is an interesting angle that we get to see. And I know this is in a certain comic run, that Paul is still alive for a certain portion of Clark's life into his adulthood. But again, not in live action. So I'm very curious to see like how long Paul Kent stays alive, or if they're going to pull, Ma Kent's going to be killed his next film. Or again, they can be through the duration of however long David Corenswet's going to be in the DCU. So very interesting that he has both of his parents make it out of this film. It's an interesting prospect. So while all that's going down, another goofy kind of overarching running joke throughout the film is the Jimmy Olsen of it all, which I like Skyler. I like the performance. I like Jimmy. That's Superman's best friend. And we see some of that in this film. This whole running joke, and I don't know if this is, I haven't read any comics that Jimmy Olsen's like this ladies' man, but it's just like I think it's a James Gunn thing, correct me if I'm wrong, of him being a ladies' man, which is like, it was funny when it wasn't as important to the film, but then it becomes like an integral plot point towards the third act, which is throughout the film, him being a ladies' man. We find out that he had a relationship with Eve Tossmacher, and she's been throughout the film. We've been led to believe that she's just an idiot, right? She's a beautiful idiot. And she's taking all these selfies at all these important locations throughout these different battles. But we find out that she's been taking selfies, collecting information about Lex Luthor's plans of like getting in his own utopia, his own country, and being the king of that country, and all his little different plans over the time that she's been with him. Eve lets Jimmy know about this, and he's like, well, if you can help me out. And she's like, can we get back together? And he's like, he really doesn't like her. He doesn't find her attractive. That's another joke, too. Like, he doesn't find these women to be attractive. Again, the joke was fine until, like, it became, like, an actual important plot point for me, which was just goofy. But they end up working together. She eventually sends over the dirt, but before then, she gets thrown to the pocket universe or whatever. But, In the meantime, we have this situation where Clark gets the motivation that he needs. He gets the true energy from his parents, and narratively, this is where the plot goes from. Like, he's always used his Kryptonian parents as like his fuel of fire, his reason why he does what he does. But now he sees the conversation that he has with his father about, like, you've become a great person no matter your Kryptonian heritage and what they wanted you to do. You control your narrative. You're a good person. You're a good person at heart. You always make the right decision. So with that information, he's going to stop Lex, which at this point, Lex is using the portal, the pocket universe. You know, Mr. Terrific's trying to keep it contained, but he ends up not being able to stop it from going out into the earth, which if it collapses, it can take away all of humanity and take it and consume, you know, black hole can consume all of the universe. So Lex is like, look, let's just do it. I need to know where Superman is. So let's get another distraction. We can find out where he is by creating this big, huge distraction by allowing the rift to consume reality. So we see, again, very, you know, comic booky type of third act where things get out of hand. And I know I've seen people online complain about this, about the destruction of Metropolis and how all these buildings are being destroyed. But if you pay attention to the film, all those buildings are empty because they evacuated the city. And, you know, obviously that's James Gunn made sure that there's not a major destruction a la what we saw in Men of Steel. And, of course, you know, you might be thinking to yourself, like, how were they able to get those people out of those homes in the city so quickly? Remembering that this is 3 years of Superman and hundreds of years of metahumans. So, like, I'm sure that this world has protocols set in place where if they see one alien that's other than Superman, or they see one weird thing go on, it's like the Marvel, right? The MCU, like going through Thanos and being blipped and being voided. There's precautions that could be had that people are like, all right, let's go. There's a flying dog. Let's get to our bunkers. But the third act is fine. I mean, we get the reveal, and I already kind of knew this, not even from the leak, but I assumed that Ultraman was going to be a clone of Clark, which it ended up being the case, and we find out that that's how Lex was able to break into the Fortress of Solitude earlier in the movie. Some people would think of Henry Cavill, like that never would have happened. But we see it's a clone. We see Clark or Superman fighting Ultraman, and they're going back and forth again. I thought the action was fine, nothing too groundbreaking. Meanwhile, and I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, the Daily Planet was so hyped up. Like, we got Lois, who did her thing in this film. Again, Rachel was fantastic. Skylar as Jimmy was great. But then, like, Wendell Pierce and Kat and all the other Daily Planet employees were just, like, forgotten about. Again, this goes to that fast pace of this film. They get into Mr. Terrific's ship. I don't even know what they were doing. I know they got on the ship because the rift was coming to their building. They had to escape. But, like, their whole I don't know, I feel like the Daily Planet was underutilized, and they just kind of didn't use them well, especially Perry White. Like, I just thought they were just there just to be there, again assuming that we're going to get more of them. And there was even an article I saw that there's going to be like maybe a Jimmy Olsen show, which I know people were like, dude, we can get like an Office type of show where it's like we just have a show of day-to-day shenanigans in the Daily Planet led by Jimmy and Lois and Perry White. But nonetheless, their whole contribution to this is they have all the dirt on Lex, and they published an article to put all the dirt on him out there, which eventually gets to the light, which ends up, you know, sitting in the prison at the end of the film. But we have Superman going toe-to-toe with Ultraman. Ultraman has the advantage because, again, they're using the cameras. He knows all the Superman's moves. But then we see Superman do something pretty punk rock. He dislocates his own arm to get this flying bus. Reminded me so much of the, what was it called? The Collider in the first Spider-Man film, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, where they're going. It's a very kind of similar plot with the black hole that was created by the multiversal thing, the Collider that Kingpin created. But he dislocates his arm and throws Ultraman into the black hole. And I'm assuming that Ultraman is being set up to be Bizarro. Like, he's going to go into this because Bizarro comes from comes from a different dimension. So I'm thinking they're setting up Bizarro. Could be wrong, but I think we're going to see Ultraman brought back in some fashion some point later down the road as Bizarro. But from here, we get the action sequence with Krypto and Superman using his lasers and taking out the Raptors, and ultimately goes to Lex's ship and fights him and has a pretty cool monologue. It was a little PBS monologue about I like the monologue, but it was a little on the nose about I'm a good man, I'm a good human. This is what makes me human. I'm more human than alien, yada yada yada. And it's I get it, right? But a little on the nose for me. But we see Lex being like, yeah, I'm petty. I don't like you. You know, pretty much being Kendrick Lamar towards Drake. And I hate the way you walk. I hate the way you talk. It's spewing all this stuff towards Superman, and Krypto bites him. The scene reminded me of the first Avengers, where Loki was like, you puny humans, and then the Hulk smashes him on the ground. It kind of reminded me of that. But we have them take out Lex. The dirt comes out on Lex. We get the quick little cameo from Maxwell Lord, who's played by Sean Gunn, about, you know, liberals and conservatives can all agree Lex Luthor is an idiot. And they throw him in a truck and say, take this ball fool to Bill Reeve, which he's not going to be in there for that long. Bill Reeve, we obviously know, is a big prison. You know, that and Arkham are like two known prisons in the DC universe. And last time we were there, again, if you saw Creature Commandos, there are some Task Force M, the metahumans that he might run into, and we might see. That's where I think we'll see Lex again. Either he's going to be in Peacemaker season 2, we're going to see him in Belle Reeve as, like, you know, passing by and we see him, or we're going to see him in season 2 of Creature Commandos being broken out at some point and seeing Lex Luthor in animated form being voiced by Nicholas Hoult. So we have that being set up. We have the film ending with Superman getting another interview with Lois, and we see them kissing in the air, having a sweet moment. We end the movie with Superman going back to his Fortress of Solitude. Something crash lands in the fortress, and it's the one and only Supergirl being played by Millie Alcock. We see her in the outfit. She's drunk as hell, which I see some people like, this is the way you want to introduce Supergirl, is this drunk fraternity girl? I'm like, yeah, this is Kara from the comics. This is leading right into Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, which, you know, as they allude to, she goes to all these different planets with the red sun because they can't get drunk. So that is what we're going to get into. And Krypto, the dog, her dog, and, you know, it's her dog, and something happens to Krypto in that story, something very damning to the character. So I really am excited to see more of Kara and see more of Supergirl, and I love Millie. You know, shout out to Rhaenyra Targaryen, and I'm really excited to see her film directed by Greg Gillespie, but she's like a big cameo, which, by the way, I totally forgot, the other big cameo in this film is actually Peacemaker. He pops up for a little bit talking shit about Superman, how he's so goody two-shoe, and whatnot. But when he kills people, he's a bad guy. So, you know, we got two major cameos, Peacemaker, and then obviously this one was Supergirl. But we see Superman on the table. The robots rebuild themselves. They're not destroyed. And he says, you know, put my parents on, because he likes to hear his parents' voice, and kind of a full circle moment. It's not his Kryptonian parents. It's his human parents, his mom and pa. And then we see the little montage of all the various different life moments that stood out to him from his memory of growing up in good hands and being the man that he is today. So a nice little cute moment. The two post-credit scenes, on face value, I was like, this is kind of silly and kind of underwhelming. But I'm like, you know what? Maybe we need to get out of that culture of the Marvel of it all, where it's like one thing leads into the next thing and it's all hyped up and you can be left disappointed. I like that. And I think James even said, like, we don't want to do the MCU post-credits where it's going to probably have a more of a cute moment to the film, or a funny moment towards the film that we just experienced, rather than, and I'm sure he might switch it up every now and then, but as of right now, the post-credits had nothing to do with nothing, right? The first one was literally Krypto hugging Superman as they're looking at the planet, which has been, we've seen this since the beginning of the marketing, so it's been in front of us this whole time. And then the second post-credit scene is Superman and Mr. Terrific as their Metropolis is rebuilding itself after the destruction left by Lex. And he puts one of these buildings together, and it's kind of lopsided, and they're looking at it, and Superman's like, yeah, it doesn't look that good. He's like, come on, man. You know, I'm doing my best. And then Superman's like, oh, man, I could sometimes be a jerk, you know, a little tongue-in-cheek moment. So, again, nothing too major, but I like that it's not like, oh, okay, we got to stick around to see Supergirl post-credit scene or see Lobo. You know, eventually, like I said, we might get one of those later down the line, but I like that it's not like depending on, you know, setting things up and making people hyped up over potentially nothing, and thinking about when you last leave the film, you're thinking about the next thing. Live in the moment. Appreciate what you just, you know, took in. So that is the breakdown and kind of my thoughts throughout the film here. I'm trying to think if there's anything else I want to kind of talk about before we wrap things up. As I've kind of talked about in my full thoughts of the film, I'm still at a 3 out of 5. I think I'm going to revisit it sooner rather than later, but I think sometimes the silliness, the campiness, and I mentioned one of the biggest things was I never felt the stakes. Like, I never felt things were too damning. Like, I felt like our heroes were going to come out on top, which they ultimately do. Putting that aside, I thought performances from David, Rachel, Nick, and Edi were fantastic. I did feel like we were shortchanged with Metamorpho and Hawk Girl, and again, I was indifferent about Guy Gardner, but we'll see more of him in the Lantern show. Thought most of the Daily Planet characters were underwhelming, and also, just like I said, it just moved so quickly. I just wish some of the scenes were able to be fleshed out, and we got to spend more time with certain characters. But kind of mentioned in one of my videos that I was kind of nervous about the DCU under James Gunn's control. And I still am. I still do have some nervousness because he does have a very particular style and a very particular tone to all of his movies. And he switched it up in this one. Like, this is the most lighthearted James Gunn film to date, besides maybe like the Christmas special for the Guardians films. But I am excited again. You know, we went from Creature Commandos, Superman, and we're getting Peacemaker. So it's like back to back to back James Gunn. I am excited for Supergirl. I am excited for Clayface. I am excited for the future of the DCU outside of James's hands and getting other creatives in this mix. And again, I love James. I'm excited to see what he does next, which I think is the Terrifics. But I am very excited for other people to get their hands on these characters that I love. And I am very intrigued to see tonally what they do with Diana, you know, Wonder Woman, what they're going to do with Batman, what they're going to do with Flash and Cyborg and the Green Lanterns and so on and so forth, and obviously other smaller characters. So I am very hopeful for the DCU. I think this is a really solid introduction to Superman and his world and his characters. Again, I really appreciate the comic booky side of this film that it embraces, even though sometimes it gets a little campy and a little takes me out of scenes. But I also appreciate that we get to jump right into this world, right? We're not doing the origins. We're not grounding it so much in reality that it is us going into their world, which I really appreciate. So, yeah. That's my thoughts, man. Let me know what you thought about the film, what you think about the Kryptonian parents being evil. Do you think Brainiac, my theory of Brainiac altering that message, is something that we can look forward to? Do you think Mr. Terrific will be leading his own show with the Terrifics? Where do you think we'll see Superman again? Will it be a cameo in Peacemaker or Creature Commandos? Or we're going to get the announcement of Superman 2 or World's Finest? When do you think we'll see Lois Lane again? When do you think we'll see Lex and all these other characters? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you made it to this end of this long discussion, whether you're watching this on YouTube, thank you for the support. Like, share, comment, subscribe. If you're listening to this in your car, in your headphones, or your phone, or your TV, on podcast, like, share, follow the podcast. I'm going to make some other videos around this film over the coming days, so keep an eye out for that on the YouTube side of things, and also TikTok and Instagram. Follow me there. Follow me on Letterboxd, all that good stuff. Thank you all for making it to this point. You all awesome. Stay safe, and I'll catch you on the next video.